Good afternoon and welcome to the fifth in our Diversity in Maritime Roundtable discussions for London International Shipping Week. My name is Chrissie Clarke. I'm the Head of Diversity and Operations at Maritime UK, and we're delighted to welcome you all here today. Today's session is going to draw on the themes that we've discussed during the week at our Pride, our Ethnicity, our Women in, and our mental health roundtables during the week. And we've got a lot of industry leaders on this call as well, and we'll be drawing out their thoughts on diversity across the maritime sector. A huge thank you to IHS Markit for sponsoring today's session, and to all our fabulous panelists. I'm now going to hand over to Debbie, who is the co-chair of our Diversity and Maritime Taskforce, to chair today's session. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome, as Chrissie said, to Friday of LISW. And I'm sure everybody's feeling a little bit tired now, but we've got a great last session, so chin up, and we hope to get some really good speakers that we've got lined up for you. Feel free to share your comments and questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and let's kick straight off. Eduardo Tavernier, so I knew I was going to mess up your name, Eduardo, from IHS Markit, to give a little welcome speech on behalf of his organisation and to thank him for sponsoring our event.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Chrissie, and you did a great job with my name, so thanks for that. So I get the privilege of saying a few words as a sponsor, so thank you very much. And rather than talk to you too much about IHS Markit, I thought I might take the opportunity to kick this off to talk a little bit about our own diversity and inclusion journey over the past 18 months. It's only the beginning of this journey, but I think that's what makes it interesting, and that's why I'm excited to be part of this panel today. So in a few words, who are we? We are an information company. We build information solutions for our customers across the transportation sector and other sectors like energy and financial markets. Interestingly, for this discussion, all three sectors, energy, transportation, being sort of male-dominated sectors, and maybe that is something we can explore today. I run the transportation business, and specifically, we have a team of about 3,000 people who serve the maritime and trade industries as well as automotive. So again, I think interesting sectors to talk about from a diversity and inclusion lens. So why are we here today? Why am I here? Well, I would say, like many companies, we as a company have been on a very exciting diversity and inclusion journey over the past 18 months. Now, of course, it started well before that, but I think something has changed in the past couple of years, and that's why these discussions have taken another dimension this year. Pre-COVID, inclusiveness was absolutely a core value of ours. We had great affinity groups, and I think we were doing okay from an inclusion standpoint. But dare I say, this was not a top organization, which meant that whilst we were committed, it probably wasn't institutionalized in the way that it should have been. COVID was a shock which changed many things in the way people work and people operate. And something happened last year where, after a few months of our teams adapting to a very unusual kind of situation, I would say the organization as a whole rallied, and a better consciousness of our people, of some of the challenges they faced, and what we could do to support them really seeped through the organization. And it happened in many other places, right? It's not just specific to us. But as an organization, I think we rallied around what do we need to do to support each other, and we celebrated diversity in a way we've never done before. We had a great example, actually. Our annual Unity Week event, which is where we celebrate diversity, was an interesting event pre-2020. Last year, it's kind of the focal point of the year. So where are we today? It's still the beginning of the journey, as I said, but one thing that has changed is that inclusion is now central to our narrative as a company, to what our leaders think about, what they're measured on, what they do every day. we were excited to be named by Forbes magazine as one of the best employers for women in 2020. And we've made tangible progress in a few areas. For instance, our board of directors now has 40% of its members are female leaders. So that's exciting, but it is just the beginning, right? We've done a bunch of things which I think are great, which we can talk about later today, but I think most of the work is ahead of us. So maybe just a word about my personal journey. So I'm here on this panel. It will not have escaped you that I'm a middle-aged white guy. So that's in one way I'm part of the problem, but of course in another way I'm part of the solution, and that's the really important part. We need to bring all of the organization on this diversity and inclusion journey, and for me it's been a very, very fun time. So what does that mean? It means that I'm not just spending my time on events like this one, but I'm working with my team on how do we change the way we manage the business to make inclusion one of the top 3 things that we focus on and are measured on. It means I take personal accountability for inclusion, for instance, as a sponsor of our women's network, which is our biggest affinity group. And it means that I change roles, right? So I lead a large organization, but when it comes to this discussion, I'm, for instance, a mentee with a number of mentors who help me understand their own journey as ethnic minorities in the organization and help kind of build my awareness on this particular path. So that's the quick story. I'm still within my time, so I just wanted to say a word about our partnership with Maritime UK. It's been in this particular space. As a charter member of Women in Maritime, we've made a pledge, right? We've publicized objectives in terms of diversity over the next 3 to 4 years. And we've made very clear, both internally and externally, our support for creating change, both within our organization and across the UK maritime sector. And as part of this partnership, we've been able to identify new areas of improvement. And we've had a platform like this one to just share best practice, learn from others, and figure out how we can do a better job with our own diversity challenges. So we've been super excited about being part of many events this week. Today's going to be a lot of fun, and I look forward to a number of initiatives we have lined up, focus groups, etc., in the next few months. But thank you, Chrissie, for the partnership, and that's the end of my intro.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think Debbie is having a few tech issues, but we should hopefully have her back in soon. I should say to the audience, please do feel free to use the Q&A function at any point during this. We will make sure we come to your questions. Okay, so on to the first question from my panel. In your opinion, does Maritime have a problem with diversity and inclusion? I'm going to come to each of our panelists. I will call you out by name. I would love to hear your thoughts. I'm going to start with Edouard.
Great, thank you, Chrissie. So my perspective on this one is a resounding yes, actually, right? So there isn't a huge amount of data, but what data we have suggests that there is probably a diversity problem in the maritime sector, in the sense that the makeup, right, of the population within the sector is quite different from the broader society. I have one data point I've seen, which is probably quoted a lot, which is the survey of the global seafarer workforce. And obviously seafarers are only one small part of that community, but that number is pretty interesting, because I think it says that 1.2% of the population is female. Now there is good news, right? It is increasing, but obviously we're a long way from parity. So what would be helpful, and we've done that internally, we've started doing that in the past couple of years, would be to capture better data, right? Because there just isn't much of it. So we need a better baseline. And the great news here is that the International Maritime Organization and WISTA International are running this survey to start building a better data set, so that not only do we have a baseline, but then we can better understand how things evolve over time. So that's good news. But of course, we don't need to wait for the data to do things. And I would always prefer to start a conversation like that, saying, I think we have a problem. I think we need to do something. So let's get to grips with it. I'll share with you just one anecdote, which is interesting, because I've seen it in the automotive sector where I tend to spend a lot of time. For a long time, there was this view that, you know what, it's okay if an auto business is not that diverse, because maybe it is a male-dominated sector, and maybe it's okay for business in that sector to reflect the industry that it's in. But of course, we've debunked that over the years, right? If you look at surveys of the influence of women, for instance, or ethnic minorities in purchasing vehicles, it's immense, right? On many measures, women influence car purchases more than men do. So this idea that somehow the sector should remain male-dominated in any way just doesn't make any sense. And today, we've not fixed our own issue, but certainly from a leadership standpoint, 50-50 in terms of gender diversity. So I'm quoting numbers here that have to do with gender diversity. Of course, that's not the only issue, but I would say there is more data, right, around gender diversity than there is around ethnic or racial diversity. And so that's probably an easier place to start if you're going to quote numbers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Next, I'm going to come to Susan. If I can just ask you to introduce yourself quickly and then to your thoughts on the question. Thank you.
Hi, Chrissie. Hi, fellow panelists, and hi, audience. So, yeah, my name's Susan Thompson. I'm the head of oil operations for the trading business in BP. And really, yeah, honoured to be here today on the panel discussing something that's really close to my heart, actually, diversity and inclusion, and equality and parity, really, in the maritime sector. So I think from my perspective, do we have a problem? Yes. I hope that all of us here today will answer something similar, and that's why we're on board. I come from seafaring, so I went to sea at 16. Was quite often the only female on board vessels, sailed at sea for 10, 12 years, and been in the sector now for over 20 years, and a lot hasn't changed, and that's, I suppose, I think sometimes we think we're doing a really good job. I don't think we are doing that good a job, and maybe that's a bit controversial, but now I think it's 1.2%, Edouard. It's been like that for the 24 years I've been in the sector. And it's not a true representation of society, of the global community that we now live in, and that I love that we live in. I have 2 children, and they don't understand why it's different now. To your customers and societal interactions, and I would just I really want us as an industry to be aware that we may have been like dabbling around the edges in each of our organisations, but actually it's through collaboration and discussions like this and coming together and really passionately having some good targets and goals and objectives and calling out bad behaviour that is there in the industry, not just for women, but actually for all ethnic minorities, for LGBTQ community. I've been listening into some of the other podcasts this week, and I'm really passionate about people. Yeah, people is what makes living really good fun. Okay, we've all missed it during COVID, these human interactions, and our sector relies heavily on really good people from all backgrounds. And before I hand over to somebody else, I think what I found really interesting as I was chatting to a psychotherapist the other day about mental health in industry, and what he said to me was, you know, there's data says that where you have men and women socially together, that it actually improves one's mental health. And I thought, what a fantastic piece of data. And I suppose if you think about it, we probably think, oh, that makes sense. And I kind of flippantly joked and said, I remember being on ships and and the joke used to be when a female joined, I hope I can say this, when a female joined, everyone smells nicer, right? Everyone takes a little bit more pride in their appearance. Not because of anything other than maybe it just feels a little bit more familiar, like home, just to have that kind of balance on board. So I definitely think that we have a problem, or actually to solve, and I think having conversations like this and just working with similarly minded people, we can actually get after it and set a trajectory for our kids coming behind us.
Wonderful, thank you. Richard, same to you. If you could introduce yourself, please, and your thoughts on the question and the other comments.
So my name is Richard Clayton, and I'm the chief correspondent at Lloyds List. And interestingly, some years ago, I used to work with Edouard in a different world. Have we got a problem? Yes, of course we've got a problem. I don't think anyone will disagree with that. But I would like to look forward. And one of the key things that I've got from London Shipping Week is that the possibilities ahead of this industry are so good, because they're going to have to be so different. So things like decarbonization, whole human element journey. We cannot afford to only employ white men of a certain age. We are missing so much talent from our industry. I think if we are going to focus on the talent rather than on who brings the talent, then I think the next 5 years could be very exciting. I would like to see recruitment managers have a form that does not say who these people are. Just say, what is the talent that they bring to the table, and then argue on those lines. I think there's so much possibility for our industry that we can't work through the seafarer side. That's slightly different. And I don't know, people like Susan can hopefully help us to get to some solutions on that. But 1.2 up to 50% is a really long stretch. But ashore, I think we can go a long way more balanced and a lot more respectful of each other's skills and talents.
Wonderful, thank you. I'll actually come back to your point afterwards about the forms, and I'm going to bring in Danny at that point, because there's actually a discussion we had around registration forms and why do we need to necessarily ask male, female on event registration forms, and kind of what the future is there. So I will bring in Danny a bit later to loop it back on that point based on the discussion we had on Monday. But Namrata, if I can come to you next, just to introduce yourself and your thoughts.
So hi, I'm Namrata Nadkarni. I am the chair of the Events and Working Group for Maritime UK's diversity initiatives. I am also obviously a woman of colour who is in maritime, and I also, in the same way as Richard, used to work with Edouard at one point. So we have lots in common on this call. There's a couple of points that I wanted to make to percent figure. We actually used to quote a 2% figure. So while the total number of women in the industry is actually increasing, in numbers in terms of comparisons, we're actually decreasing, which is a real problem. And one of the things that I wanted to flag is it's not just a recruitment problem. It is a recruitment and retention problem. We need to make sure that the industry is actually really welcoming. And I'm also going to flag something which is, I believe, slightly controversial, and say we are still talking about diversity in terms of men and women. Like, that is very far few steps behind in larger diversity conversations that are happening within the wider world. And if you just looked at Twitter, you'll see kind of the real gap. So if we are really talking about diversity inclusion, we need to be thinking of the trans community. We need to be thinking of neuroatypical people. We need to be thinking of people who are disabled. We need to be everybody has something to add to the table. And to Richard's point about not having people's names or information like this on there, I think it's a wonderful idea in theory, and I'm going to push back a little bit just because this is something I have a strong opinion on, and say the problem is if you aren't gathering that data, but if you aren't realizing it, you will have a bias towards people who've had similar opportunities to you. And the experiences of people who don't fit the norm of your hiring will come through in the CVs, in the experiences they've had. Like a really basic example is a lot more in my history, a lot more people with wealth will take internships, unpaid internships, because they can afford to, and then their CVs look wonderful. And somebody without access to those will not have the same kind of CV just to be part of the table, so they will not get those opportunities. And that, of course, once you kind of look at that, and I just used wealth as the marker, but you need to look at language and people of color and people who are not neurotypical, neuroatypical even, who that intersect is really important. So if we're really going to make it inclusive, there is a lot to be done, and I definitely think that Maritime has a lot of work to do. So sorry for kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent, Chrissie, but those are my thoughts.
Not at all, and that's what this is all about, this session. Thank you, Nam. Karina, if I can ask you to introduce yourself and your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Chrissie. Yes, I'm an arbitrator. I'm an international arbitrator, mainly on maritime cases. And that happens because I'm not a lawyer. I don't have a legal background as such. I qualified as an arbitrator, yes, but I've come from the shipbroking industry and the derivative industry. And I think, Edouard, you have mentioned ethnicity and gender diversity very much, and I think Richard tried to scrape on the social mobility as well. And I very much think that we are missing a huge point here in terms of skills and qualifications. The shipping industry does not, hardly any of the jobs in the shipping industry require a degree. But what does everybody hire? They hire graduates. As a shipbroker, you don't need a degree. And we had, when I started on the Baltic Exchange in 1993, we were quite a few women, young women, when we started. But again, Namrata, you mentioned already retention, exactly. Not that many actually stayed. So I've done over 30 years now in the shipping industry. In fact, because obviously my training was earlier than 93. But we have to realize we must not hire graduates. We must highlight to every single person that is out there, that is still in school, and that every single person has a chance to make a huge career in the shipping industry. And a classic university degree. And as long as we totally omit that, we will never achieve diversity, because social mobility is the other issue here. Because if you don't go to university, and I'm afraid more people going to public schools have a greater chance than going to state schools and governmental schools to go to university. And we are completely overlooking that. And I think that is an issue we really need to address. And I think, Edouard, you have mentioned, you've scraped on that as well. It's always been a male-dominated industry. Why is that? First of all, shipping is still a secret industry. And why is it a secret industry? Because we only hear about it from our very close relatives that work in the maritime industry. And historically, of course, these have been men. And therefore, you just hear that from the men. And you've highlighted all the factor that it's only 1.2 or 2% of females in the shipping industry. So therefore, we have very successful women in the shipping industry that have been here for 30 years already. And if you look at LinkedIn, there's lots of them posting now, I've been here in the shipping industry for 30 years, and not just for 5 years, you know. And we need to highlight, yes, you can have already, and women have had long, successful careers in shipping, and not just women, but as I say, for example, on the Baltic floor, we've had graduates. Yes, they hired graduates, but we have also had a lot of what we called borough boys, you know, from 16, they left school and went, and they, most of the time, were the more successful brokers because they were a lot hungrier and they were really successful. And we also need to look at remuneration, not according to qualification, but we need to remunerate according to results and the engagement and what they bring to the table. And I think that is heavily overlooked. And that is sort of what I think is something and maritime under the umbrella of the Industry for Future, which is headed by Lorna Wagner. I think she does it very well already, that we are trying now to get all the professionals into schools and address it. And we bring a diverse professional team into schools, that they see it is a very diverse industry. Unfortunately, the pandemic has slowed this down considerably, but I think if we pick that up again, we will see results. But as Richard said, the results will probably not come before the next 5 years. But I think that is something we need to address, because we clearly have a problem.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm now going to hand back to Debbie. I can see we've got our first Q&A, so I'll hand to Debbie to lead on that.
Hi, sorry everyone, it's typical, isn't it? Your laptop works every single time until we're trying to chair a meeting and then I am back now. And I think we've already raised some really interesting points. And I think, you know, what we've highlighted is that it's not just about women, it's not just about ethnicity, it's about education, it's about social mobility. It's, you know, there's so much in maritime that we kind of need to change. And I think, interestingly, when you look at the COVID, you know, the effects of COVID, it's supposed to affect women's jobs more than men's jobs, and it's supposed to affect those of lower education more than higher education. So I think the stats on certainly women in shipping are going to get worse before they get better, because of the number of women who are losing their jobs, particularly in the cruise industry. So I think, you know, in the next year, you know, we might even be in a worse place than we are now. So my next question then kind of leads on from that. We've talked a lot about build back fairer, and, you know, coming back from COVID with a fairer society. Can maritime build back fairer, or have we just got too broad a bridge to gap? And I'm going to start with you, Richard, on that, because you talked a lot about kind of what the future might be. So what are your thoughts on that, Richard?
Thank you, Debbie. Can maritime build back fairer? Yes, of course it can. I think I agree that people have joined shipping for very narrow reasons. They have a family member or a friend, mainly a male friend, who talks about the industry, and that's interesting. I'll go into that. And often people join shipping not because they have any knowledge of shipping, but because somebody talks it well. And I think one of the issues we've got in the industry is that we don't talk about our industry enough. We're not positive enough. We don't understand how many. Just because one job doesn't happen to suit you and your talents doesn't mean there aren't other jobs within the industry that could be for you. So recruitment and retention we talked about earlier. If the job isn't suiting you, what else is there in the industry that we could perhaps push them towards? And I think building back fairer is not about trying to find the best person at every opportunity. It's trying to explore what are the talents you have and where can we place those talents across the industry. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but what I'm trying to say is we are all a collection of talents. Where can those talents best be used? How can we talk about our industry much more positively than we do to those in our friendship communities and our family communities and the people who are looking for a job, you know, in the next generation? It's up that process to build back better.
Thanks, Richard. That's a really interesting point. Edouard, what are your thoughts? Can maritime build back better?
Thanks, Debbie. So the answer is yes, of course, and it must, right? But maybe 2 points to add to what's been said before. The first one is we need to be clear on the diagnostic here. Like, what are we trying to fix? And one of the obvious distinctions everyone understands here, but I figured out 2 or 3 years ago, was diversity and inclusion are two different things, right? And it's sort of easy to get focused on, let's create diversity in our statistics and hire more people to create more diversity. But that in itself does not create an inclusive organization, an inclusive workforce. And I think that ultimately is the end goal. Now, that requires changes in mindsets, changes in behaviors, and that takes. My answer is yes, Maritime can build back better and fairer, but it takes commitment and it takes real effort and it takes time. Just to give you one kind of bit of experience, personal experience, right? And bouncing back on what Namrata said earlier on, it's amazing that in some businesses today, managers still think of women as a minority, right? Like we're talking of more than 50% of society here. So that's step one. But one of the things I did 2 months ago, which was a fantastic discovery experience, was sponsor a panel within our company on trans and non-binary identities, and really thinking about what does the world look like from their lens, with a number of external panelists, and the only declared non-binary person in our organization. Talking of being a minority, that must feel very lonely. Until then, I had not spent much time thinking about what does society look like from that particular lens experience. And I think learning that is what becoming inclusive is all about. So my last point on this one is, yes, it is possible to institutionalize change, but it takes real investment in building awareness and education across all of our teams. We discussed recruitment and retention. I love the ideas, right? Blind CVs is something we're trying to introduce in our company. Mandatory kind of diverse talent pools. You cannot hire unless you've spoken to candidates of diverse background. And then making sure that every interview panel is diverse when we hire candidates. So all of these are policies we're experimenting with. They cost money, right? Because we don't have the resource to do it today. We need to put more resource into it. And same thing in retention. In order to support candidates of ethnic minorities or female leaders or inclusive, well, diverse talents, generally speaking, it does behind talent development programs, leadership development programs that are focused, that are tailored. And so all of that is doable, but it takes leadership commitment.
Thank you, Edouard. And Katrina, Karina, we'll come to you next on this question. Can Maritime build back fairer, particularly ashore?
Most definitely, because we are coming from a very low sort of basis. As everybody said, we do have a problem, yes. So of course we can build back better. And I think build back better means also to learn where to reach the talent we want. And that is not through emails or websites necessarily. That is not through Facebook or LinkedIn. The talents that you want to have to apply for your jobs, you find on Snapchat, on the social media platform, Instagram. That's where you find them. And the best way to reach out for them is not us telling them, us old folk, if you forgive me for including all of you, I certainly am old folk. But the point is, for in their eyes, you know, a 16-year-old, I'm definitely ancient. So why do they want to listen to me? They want to listen to peers that are just maybe 5 or 6 years older. They want to hear how did they get into the maritime industry. They want to hear how much they love it. How did they discover it? How wonderful and fantastic their jobs are. And not boring jobs. I've looked at YouTube. It was very funny. There is, I looked at sort of when I typed in maritime or careers in maritime, the first video comes up. That's from Jeff HK. Jeff is a Canadian. He is, if I may say, young lad. I can see some Asian roots there, but he's from Canada. And his it's quite long, but I do have to say he's very captive. And he talks about how cool the maritime industry it is. And he goes across the board, whether it's pilots, captains, seafarers, or ashore. He talks like he reaches the people, and he had 1.1 million views. That's where we've got to be. And not just talk about it and create wonderful HR programs in order to make sure that we hire accordingly, etc. But we also need to reach the people that actually you want to have the choice to employ. And that means being across everywhere in all the schools, as I say, but mainly on the social media platforms that the youngsters reach. And that's where we want to be, I think.
Thank you, Karina. I'll take that as being an old person. From a 16-year-old, I think anyone over 21 is ancient to a 16-year-old, aren't they? Now I'm going to come to you next, Susan, but I'm not going to ask you the same question. I'm going to raise the question that's been asked in our Q&A of being at sea. Do you think behaviour towards women and minority groups differs? So do you think when we've talked about there's lots of different problems in different areas of our diversity, do you think the attitude that people have to those different minority groups changes, or is it just, for want of a better word, the old white male pale stale and everybody against everybody else?
Good question. So thanks, Susan Clarke, I think it is more like that, for answering. Congratulations on your Merchant Navy medal, Captain Clarke Holden, so thanks for that. I think the main difference is in an office environment or a shoreside environment. It's not, I think it was Edouard's point, in some ways we're not bad on diversity in some areas, okay? I've been and it's quite a diverse bunch up in the Big Smoke, as I would say, as a Scottish person who lives down south. It's the inclusivity, and I think walking in other people's shoes is how I've heard it described recently. It is still there. It is what it is. I think the sector through legacy has been and let me just cut the guys a bit slack here, all right? It's not necessarily their fault that they're what's classed as white male privilege, right? It is what it is. I think what is becoming certainly in BP, and I'm sure they won't mind me saying this on their behalf, but it's my opinion, is that we are very now aware of what is now determined as white male privilege, but what does that mean? And just getting the differences, to Nam's point earlier, the experiences that people would have had, they actually, people come at things from a different perspective. It's good for business. Your customers also represent that base, and unfortunately money tends to be really what keeps the industry going, so it's good to target that side of it, I think, sometimes when I have these conversations. So I think ashore we also have retention issues, okay, of keeping diverse and from the inclusivity debate probably, but also because some stuff in the industry is just old-fashioned. Like I would challenge any ship owner on the call now here, or any crewing agent, when was the last time they looked at their simple maternity and paternity rights? Yeah, for their seafarers. It's such, like, generations today of having, it's normal, right? It's part of life. So how do we retain, and that's an inclusive society, different members of society when you become parents. So the medical standards of your care, like technology has advanced, industry, not like sometimes we're a bit slow in the regulatory catch up of what's now acceptable for people to be at sea. People can self-regulate and self-medicate at sea. Now technology is much better with different communications. We're on coastal routes deep. So actually, when did the last time we actually looked at those and revised them to say actually certain disabilities we could actually now look at and include in this society, because it used to be it wasn't safe. So sometimes we default to safe. Everything's too safe and we become quite risk averse rather than taking that challenge. But I think for me, the retention issue is close to my heart. I've been in this industry for now over 20 years. And I think that for women, I hear a lot. I don't need a lot of data because I speak to a lot of women in the industry. And a lot of women almost feel as if they have to decide. Do I have to decide? Do I want a career? Or do I want to have kids? And it absolutely vexes me. I hate it. I think how awful that they have to make that decision. Bearing in mind there's always a man and normally involved in this conversation, and they're not necessarily having to make that decision about their career at the same time. So I think for me, I'm really passionate about that sea to shore transition. We don't lose that expertise from the industry, and therefore I really feel privileged to be in the position I'm in at BP. And I was in a conversation yesterday about intersectional bias, about, similar to Eduardo, we have a women's network, we have a positive ethnic network, we have an LGBTQ network, we have the neurodiversity network. We're a massive corporation. Everyone is trying to have the conversations, really listen, make a change. The challenge is that we set ourselves some punchy targets and then we actually strive to get and hold each other to account, I would say.
Thanks very much, Susan, and congratulations to you as well on your Merchant Navy medal. It's well deserved. I'm gonna take that same question and go to Danny. Looking at from working for Nautilus International, the trade union, do you find that seafarers and members are coming to you with different issues based on whether they're male or female, or is bullying and harassment a kind of a general issue that's affecting all people equally, or do you find the same way that the attitudes to different diversity groups are different?
Thanks, Debbie, and thank you for bringing me in on that question. On bullying and harassment, it is something that still needs to be resolved within our industry as a whole. It's something that we've made great steps on in the past, and together with partners at ETF, Ship Owners Association. However, when we look at more recent inquiries coming into Nautilus, then some of those do seem to have links with minority areas. For example, LGBT plus is something that people are coming to us with. And I think that is because we've developed an element, or we've developed an environment of trust where people now do trust us to be able to deal with such issues, because we've been talking about these matters for some time for LGBT plus people. Previously, I think we would have had men and women, male and female issues coming to us perhaps more, but now with the fact that we've created the environment where people can talk about these kind of things more freely with their union, and hopefully within Maritime UK and Diversity in Maritime program, the LGBT plus area is something that people should feel free to come and speak to us about. With other minorities, other diverse strands, it's sometimes you can see that somebody is of a diverse nature just by their appearance. For LGBT plus people, that's not always the case. And so just having that environment where people can feel themselves, or can feel able to be themselves, is something that is really important to me as the chair of the Pride in Maritime Network, but also to my role in diversity at Nautilus International. I think that in establishing those environments across the industry, I think it's really important that talking about what we're doing, communicating about what we're doing, both to the seafarers and shoreside workers that are working in the industry now, and outwardly to new entrants, because it has changed in the last 7 years of me being in maritime. I've witnessed that change. There's still a long way to go, but I think together with the work that we're doing intersectionally and within our individual groups, we've made great progress and can continue to do so.
Thank you, Danny. We've had a question come in from the audience. I'm going to ask that now. And forgive me, Chrissie, I'm going to break your question down a little bit. So Karina, when you were speaking, you talked about videos on YouTube and making the industry cool to attract young people in. But given that we've talked about retention being a part of the problem, but also we've got problems within the industry already, should we be fixing those problems first and then worrying about attracting more people into the industry? Or do we need to bring those people into the industry to enable us to fix those problems that are internal? It's kind of a chicken and egg, and which do you think comes first?
Debbie, and I think, thank you for the question, Christian, because for pointing this out. It's very good. I can perhaps give you an example. When I was the managing director of a shipbroking company, that was a shipbroking company, sort of locally, a lot of other shipbroking companies or other shipping companies looked down on, thought, oh, you are unsuccessful, you are this, you are that, you know, like, so all the employees in that were sort of adopting the same attitude. And what I did was, in fact, change them, saying, no, you are great, you're doing a great job, you fixed again, you're fantastic, you know, like, go for it. And also outside created the image of us actually being successful. So I did it both inside and outside. And because then eventually, yes, I hate to use the comparison, but perhaps like Donald Trump, as long as you talk about it along, people eventually will believe it. But no, of course we backed it up. We didn't just talk about it. We were attitude that needed to change. And I needed to instill and empower my employees as well as empower our image outside. And that helped enormously. So I think we do have to do exactly the same in this, I mean, for not just one company, but for the industry. We have to empower everybody inside the industry and saying what an exciting job we are doing. And we have to say this and verbalize it much more often than not, because we don't talk about this at all inside and internally. And we also need to talk about it outside. And then we have the people from the inside showing the example that they are indeed really excited to work here. And it doesn't matter whether it's a Clarke or they all do something really, really important in order to move 80% of all the goods that are moved by sea, and every single person, whether at sea or ashore, is part of that. And I think that is probably an answer, at least.
Thank you, Karina. I'm going to come to you with that same question, Richard. Being our media representative at the moment, what can we do to help to improve the cool image of maritime, and do we need to change, or do we need to change it internally before we can start going out and being more verbal about the industry?
Just a little bit of background on me. My father was a shipbroker. My father began as a barrow boy, and he ended up as a chief exec, or whatever they called them in those days. And I am in shipping because of him. So I'm quite keen on this idea that just because you start off as a clerk or as a young journalist doesn't mean you have to stay there for the rest of your life. If you are ambitious, you can grow. So I would like to see each of us talking about our industry to anybody that we meet. And of course we can, but there is lots to be proud of in our industry. And as I said, earlier, if you don't like the job you're in, don't leave the industry. Have a look at what else is there. Now, I think there is a danger that we leave the diversity thing to the management. And we say, why isn't the management doing this? Why isn't the man? Well, don't think like that. We're all in this together, and we all have ideas, and we all share our ideas with one another. Just talk about it. I was going to say, and perhaps this is not the right place, but I'll say it anyway. I'm a Christian. And one of the things you do as a Christian is talk about your faith. Okay, and I think this is pretty much the same. Talk about the good things in our industry to those all around us, and it's the best way of getting people in. Because I'm old, white, and male, really sorry about that, but I'm not on Snapchat. And in fact, there's one or two of the others ones that well, that's fine, because my my community of friends and relations are the people that I have dinner with, and the people that I have lunch with, and the people that I talk to elsewhere. If we're all on Instagram and we're all on Snapchat, that's one constituency, but we're missing a huge range elsewhere. As a journalist, I write, but I also talk. And London Shipping Week, can I say, has been fantastic for getting people next to one another. The dinner last night, some of the conversations I had were absolutely magnificent. It's so much better, isn't it, in person than it is virtual. I would love to be in a room with all of you and all of our audience putting this together. It can't be, but hey, let's talk positively about our industry.
Thank you, Richard. And Nam, as the Diversity and Maritime occasions and events, it would be wrong not to come to you and say, what do you think? Do we, can we solve the problem of making maritime cool, or do we need to fix internal problems first?
So thank you for coming to me. I have, as expected, strong opinions on this. I definitely think that we need to make the industry more inclusive and make it a better place to work. If you make the industry a place where people are excited to work, it will automatically get that edge of coolness. So I remember having a conversation with somebody, and I will put my hand up. For those of you who don't know on this call, I have been a maritime journalist for 18 years. At the moment, I'm on secondment to the IMO, where I work on their media and communications team. So I'm slightly on the dark side of things, but I'm very much in touch on the kind of communication circuit. And one of the things that's really important to know is who is asking the questions, who are you asking the questions to as a journalist, because those are the stories that we'll get. And I know this from myself. I was like, we go after the CEOs and high-level management because those are the things that will sell your paper. These tend not to be so diverse when you're looking around the room. At London Shipping Week, at least, I looked around the room and I was like, right, I stand out. And I'm not even that high level, but when I was looking at panels, they were very male and very white. And a thing that I'm really passionate about saying is diversity and inclusion, if you're truly committed, is a journey. So we need to fix it. And we also need to work at making it cool. And also, don't be afraid when you get it wrong. You will get it wrong. It's part of the journey. So you need to be open to criticism. You need to really appreciate those people that come to you and say to you, by the way, have you realized that this is wrong? Because it's an opportunity for you to work to make it better. So make sure you're listening to the right people. It's all very well to say, speak out about it. But if somebody doesn't feel safe to speak to you, you're going to miss out on all these wonderful learning. Of my career, there were some instances where I did not appreciate the tone I was being talked to or being called a cutie to do something. And I was like, I'm not your cutie. I'm a reporter. Thank you very much. Like, yeah, I say yeah because I saw Julie's face and she was not impressed either. My point being, as I've gotten older and as I've gotten more established, I had social currency to use to kind of push back. But what I would really encourage everybody on this call to do, and particularly leaders, is make it a safe environment for people to give you that feedback early on, to be really inclusive, for you to say, this is what it will work like. And to thank them when they tell you that you've gotten it wrong, because we will make it cool. It is such an awesome place to work. The most boring conversation I had in my life with somebody was from shipping, and he spoke to me about containers. And at the end of it, I just asked him what he did in his free time. And it turned out this 78-year-old man was a DJ in Monaco called Daddy. So I'm sure there's lots of cool lurking. We just need to make sure that we make people excited to be in the industry. So thank you.
Thanks, Nam. There's a lot of comments in the chat about culture and about it being part of education problems where, the levels that people are coming in and the kind of social structures, and that actually this problem is bigger than maritime. And so, Julie, I want to come to you next and say, is this a much bigger problem than the maritime, and can we basically not solve it in maritime because we need to solve all of society?
Seems like a bit of a cop-out, doesn't it? No, we can all, you don't have to wait for society to change for you to make change. That's kind of nonsense, isn't it? Here's the thing, right? It's not about making maritime cool, is it? It's about being a little bit more honest about the industry we're in, and stop never. We go, oh, it's not very good for seafarers, but quickly let's divert our focus over here and say Snapchat's the problem, people don't want to join shipping. That's not the reason people don't want to join shipping. That's not the reason why the culture isn't very friendly to people who are diverse. And it's not easy to be negative. It actually makes you really unpopular in this industry to say it. It's really easy for us to go out there and say we feed the world and we clothe the world, because we do, and we're super proud of that. But we don't want to face the difficult. We don't want to face the difficult problem, which is actually we're all a combination of privileges. It's not about going after Richard and Edouard, but it's about saying we're all a combination of different privileges and different things that hold us back. It doesn't make us bad people. But it doesn't mean you get a free pass because I don't want to call you out on it. So what can we do? Well, we can just get a bit more bloody angry about it. Listen to us all saying we should, but of course we should. But we can all do it ourselves. We can put ourselves out there. I'll be really honest, I was really hesitant about putting myself out there to be on the Women in Maritime Taskforce. And then on the ethnicity task force. But it seems it doesn't matter how many business cases we prove, how many business cases we show that diverse leadership, diverse executive teams make your business better. Somehow we're not able to translate that into action. And I wonder if that's because we like to say somebody else should do something about it. So this would be my challenge to you, which I learned about this week, which the amazing Cecilia Harvey, who's the chair of my Ethnicity and Maritime Task Force, told me about, that she learned from somebody who worked at Google, I think. And that is, if you can just have a thing, you were a child where you were excluded for some reason, not invited to a birthday party or not allowed to play on the football team, and remember how that made you feel. And then think about, just kind of remember how that made that feeling inside, and then understand that every single one of us, not just on the panel, but every single one of us who's watching this event, you may not think you're a leader, but you are. You lead and you influence and you impact lots and lots of people around you. And so on Monday, why don't you go to work and think about the kind of leader you want to be? And do you want to make people have that feeling when you're around them? Or do you want to make people feel differently? And that means every single one of us needs to be responsible for the culture that's around us. And I would recommend we all start with a serious dose of honesty. And I'm not going to.
Thanks, Julie. And Julie mentioned the business case for diversity, and I know that's something, Sue, that you're a big fan of. What do you think about this issue of broader culture versus the maritime culture?
Well, I think the maritime industry cannot ignore what is coming down the line, because we're going to need different people in the sector as we transgress from being the industry we are at the moment to all the things that are happening to us with automation, AI, and all these things coming in. And that's going to bring in different people into the workforce that we've never had before. And therefore, there is going to be a change, whether we like it or not. It's how we embrace that change and how we make it positive for the maritime industry going forward. But the business case is completely proven, and it's proven in so many different ways. And just talking on that subject, there are things that turn into reality if there is a mixed team that does that pattern against the all-male teams that have been gone in. This is research that's been done through over 40,000 patterns that were filed with different pattern offices around the world. And then they looked at the people on the list underneath who produced them. So from business's point of view, if you want innovation and you want growth in your business and you want to benefit, by having a diverse team of innovators and people doing the actual work right at the beginning, it means that you're going to be more successful as a company. That puts value on the bottom line, it keeps happy shareholders, and it also makes for a better workforce, because it's also proven that diverse teams increase the happiness level in any company you go to. So and that's not even going on the McKinsey stuff that everybody rolls out, or the research they did about the extra EBITDA that is added to a company and all the other. But what we really need is embracing. What I'm really worried about at the moment is that we're in a, what I call the tick box world, where people are signing charters all over the place, left, right and centre, and saying, aren't I good? I signed the Maritime and Women's Charter. I signed the Women in Rail Charter. I've signed the Banking Charter. I've signed any charter you want to name. Signing a charter is nothing. It's actually then thinking about, how do I deliver that in my company? How do I make the change, like Julie says? You know, what are those steps that we're going to bring in that's going to make it different? Because if you want the best person for that job, that person will not come and work for a company where it sees you are not delivering this. So if in the industry we want mediocre people to be attracted to us, then that's the type of culture we're going to attract. Because these people are going out there and they're looking at websites, they're real policies, not the sort of thing you put in the employment handbook and forget about on the shelf. They're looking at what the company is doing in the global world, how it's behaving, how it's doing its supply chains and its resourcing, how it actually behaves, and it's looking on social media, what its staff are saying about working in that company. Then it makes a decision to put in an application form for that job. So you're not even going to get to the people applying for the job to get the best person to deliver the job if culturally the company is not attractive. So there's some real work that needs to be done from the top downwards, not ticking boxes, but empowering the staff underneath to make those changes. And whether it happens, it's amazing. And we're hearing some fantastic stories. And there are some really good stories coming out in the maritime industry, but they're good news stories and they're not being promoted enough.
Thanks, Julie. Chrissie, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with Sue's point there. And what's been interesting during the week is the most simplistic thing we need to start thinking about and change our attitude towards is our people are our greatest asset. They are our asset. We need to start investing in our people. And that's where the cultural change is going to happen. It's not hard. They're not a line on the P&L, well, they are. But as soon as we start thinking about that, that is where the change is going to happen. Our leaders need to be brought into that, but all levels. And going back to Richard's point as well, that if we are talking about it's not being a tick box, and it absolutely isn't a tick box, the leaders need to start changing, but everybody in the workforce needs to be part of this. We need to stand shoulder to shoulder as allies next to people that are from other protected characteristics. We need to be able to call it out and call it in and call it on. But let's just go back to our people are our greatest asset. It's as simple as that. That's the end of my point.
Thanks, Chrissie. And Karina, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Thank you, Debbie. Yes, Chrissie, you're absolutely right. People are our greatest asset. And Sue, absolutely, we need to live it and we shouldn't just tick the boxes. I've had a wonderful experience and the pleasure of working. We were 25 people in a team, in a trading team. And we were 14 different nationalities. We were from the age of 22 to 70. And we were also gender diverse. And that was the most productive team, that was the most motivated team. We were there to assist each other, as I say, and motivate each other and empower each other on all the jobs we did. It was just brilliant. And you only create this environment if you have an extremely diverse team and across the board of all diversities. And that has just been absolutely brilliant. That really supports the report you are, or the analysis and research that you are stressing, Sue. Exactly. The one point that I would like to make in terms of mediocrity or etc. For 3 decades, I've now seen that women in the shipping industry, at least in my environment, have been absolutely fantastic. And they obviously, and I'm sorry to say, yes, I do bring a bit of baggage there, but you have to work twice as hard and you have to produce double the results, etc. And who gets promoted? The male colleague, the mediocre one. How can we change that? I'm afraid we can only change that, or not only, but with a greater effect by, I'm afraid now, making sure that, for example, the woman will be promoted. And if the man and the woman choose the woman now, it's time. We have worked so hard for it and we've always been overlooked, always. Okay, and I think, I'm afraid we have to use these measures, like, for example, Norway with their quota, gender quota, that started in the 70s. Now it takes decades to get through this, and they've been very successful. And Norway has been a very successful country. And I've worked for a Norwegian company, and that was exactly, they created that environment. And us 25 people in that team were, for example, in that Norwegian company. But you can't create this unless you force people to do so. And if we occasionally have to take the mediocre woman or the mediocre different backgrounds, yes, please, I'm all for it now, because my experience has showed me otherwise we will never change. Sorry, very strong, but I have very strong views on that.
Thank you, Karina. And the panelists are going mad with next, Edouard, as you've not spoken for a while, so please do come in.
Now, I just wanted to draw a thread between what Julie, Sue, Chrissie, and Karina said, because there's something that's really important here, which is leadership accountability, right? That's what we're talking about. The way to make things change is to have leaders fully accountable for making that change. Why? Because we are talking about real change here, right? And business leaders are the ones who allocate resource and investment. And some of what we're talking about does require real investment. They are the ones who set success metrics, right? What do successful people do in my company? What am I going to hold the people accountable for? And they're the ones who measure performance, right? What does a good leader look like? They're the ones who promote at the top, right? We haven't spoken about representation. We should talk about this. But diversity starts at the top of organizations. And all of these are prerogatives of leadership, business leadership. I'm very clear that for the team of 3,000 people that I support, the buck is going to be changed in terms of diversity and inclusion outcomes. It's down to me to make it happen, right? With my team, of course, but I'm responsible for it. So I think it came up in a few conversations, but I think 100% the most important thing here is leadership accountability for driving that change.
Thank you, Edouard. And Barbara, please do come in.
Thank you very much, Debbie. I think, Edouard, you're spot on. I think, and you're part of the solution to this. So it's not just about pointing fingers to a white male like yourself, because I think you are very much part of the solution. Being in the industry for 10 years or 11 years, I have experienced also a situation where women were not very helpful to one another. So I think it's not just leadership accountability. I think we're all accountable, whether we're at the top or at the bottom. Or at the bottom. Now, Nam made a very good point earlier about diversity, and it goes back to Karina's point on positive discrimination. And what does that mean? That can come across really absolute crucial point in here, and that came from one of my mentors that used to work for Shell for many years, and him and I talked about this positive discrimination point, and he made a very valid point where he looks at the CV and sees candidates who are equally capable of doing the job, but the man may have a slightly better CV. You have to think about the opportunities that he was given. And for that reason, he will hire the woman, because he will be looking at the years of the opportunities that the woman, or it's not just a woman, actually, we have to talk about diversity in full spec. But I wanted to go back to something that Karina said as well about Snapchat, and I would have to disagree with Karina on bringing young people. I think inclusion is, we need to include everybody. And actually from a practical perspective and practical solutions, the older generation, we are missing on quite a lot of talent of older people that are now being bypassed for the job because they're 54 or 60, and people think that they no longer offer value or energy. I have hired in my time a gentleman that was 72 years old into a business, and if everybody brought the level of energy he brought, and he didn't have education, but he had experience. But if everybody brought the level of dedication, quality of work that he brought, and I'm actually recommending him at the moment as we speak to a new business, and he's 75 now. So I think we need to look at the whole spectrum of people, not just young and not just female. The inclusion is everybody. And I think there are fantastic also opportunities that some of the bigger organizations bring in, about bringing, for example, women that might have been at home for 16 years bringing up children. The moment the children flee the nest, make them more comfortable returning to work, because they are huge assets. But I think accountability is with all of us. And one more point that someone made, and I think it was Namrata, Uk, I think, made a point about not being afraid to make a mistake. And I think we will all make mistakes, and not being a person of I'm not very diverse. Yes, I'm female, but I'm white, as everybody can see. I do not hold keys to every lock and every question and every issue. And I may make mistakes when I speak. So on issues that may not affect me on day-to-day in day-to-day life. And that's why I love this group. I love this group when we have conversations about how the language that we use, how people feel about it. But so first of all, don't be afraid to make mistakes. I've made them, but also give luck and take time to explain to them, only if they don't understand after you've explained to them why you were affected by a particular decision or a particular statement made. Then pass judgment, because I think we need to give us slack. And then on a positive note, I've been in the industry for 11 years and I've seen change. I have, when I first started, I definitely never queued for the toilet in conferences, never ever. Now I do. So slightly more colloquial, but I think that's my measure. Bad one. But going back to what Susan said, I think Susan is spot on. I think we need to have some real meaty targets for us to make progress. And some level of positive discrimination is required. And that also gets introduced also by diverse panels. I have been talking recently to a company about a potential job I spoke to. Single one of them was male. Fantastic people, had a great time. It doesn't really bother me, but it was just the observation, bearing in mind the conversation we're having today. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. I think when we can queue for the women's toilets at shipping events in the same as the rest of life, that's when we'll really know. And I think that should basically be the measure of women in shipping, is when we have to queue for the toilets in every event. And Nam, do you want to come in on that?
I do. I specifically want to reference a question and a comment that were in the chat, because somebody flagged this notion of diversity at the cost of meritocracy, and this notion that, you know, people are being hired just because they're diverse rather than because they have the skills. And to that I say, that is a terrible hiring practice. You are basically setting your diverse candidates up to fail. You're putting them in a situation for which they don't have the skills, and then the minute they fail, you go, right, this has been confirmed. Everybody who isn't fitting my exact mold does not have the skills for this. What you really need to be questioning is, why you haven't had enough qualified diverse candidates apply for this role, and where are the cracks in the system where all your diversity is basically falling out, leaving you with a single pipeline that looks identical. That is a real issue. And somebody actually put a comment in there, which I also think was really great, which was, you know, to kind of, I'm just going to find it in the answered questions. If you want to read it, please feel free there. Somebody pointed out that to argue that having diversity and inclusion policies leads to mediocre people being hired is to ignore the structural issues that might lead to a BME female LGBTQ plus person to be less qualified for the role. And that's exactly the point that I made earlier. It's the opportunities that you have exposure to. You're not then going to have the ability to compete on the same level. And by not really are perpetuating those systems of inequality. And it is up to us to really look at that. And I think, Karina, your point of, you know, if you've got a mediocre woman and a slightly more qualified man, there's no reason that you can't hire the woman and upskill her. Like, why not? Give her some opportunities, give people other opportunities. There is so much learning that we can do. And to the point that I made earlier and that Barbara kind of flagged, where we're like, we're going to get it wrong. I just want to say, I, as a person of color and a woman, my experiences don't speak to lots of other people's experiences. There is no true representation. So you need a wide variety of diverse voices to actually get true diversity. It isn't enough to have a bunch of women on a panel. You need people who come from different sectors, who have different education, who have different economic backgrounds, people who are different stages of their careers, because, you know, it's not flat. The world would be, I suppose, simpler if it were, but it isn't. And we do important jobs, and it's up to us to advocate for and to call in, and another type of calling, which I can't remember, but to make it more inclusive. And we need to do that. And so I think the argument that diversity actually is a challenge to, you know, a difficult technical industry isn't really true, because 50% of the population could be doing that job and they're choosing not to. The problem isn't the job. The problem is why it doesn't appeal. It's a different question.
Thank you, Namrata. And Susan, I see you have your hand up, and I actually want to move on from this issue and just cover something that Amiria has raised as a question. And thank you. And please, everyone that is listening, please do post your questions up if you want to ask a specific question as well. And Amiria, I'm going to read out what she said. I think it's very interesting, and then come to you to answer that and any other comments you want to make. And Amiria says, as a woman seafarer in the commercial sector, I fear the slow pace of the maritime industry to keep up and be relevant. I have never once sailed with someone I would call in, and as a casual employee, very little thought is given to retention or progression. The people that are supposed to represent us struggle to easily understand the particular issues to women. The problem is cultural, not easy to fix. So Susan, have you sort of sailed with many women when you were sailing, and do you have role models that you've aspired to, or as a kind of very much a trailblazing woman in this industry, have you had to just forge your own path?
Oh, Davey, I was going to go, and then you've added that on at the end. You know, Amira, and I hope that I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I really resonate with your question. It's so tricky, right? Because it can be quite lonely at times, right? You don't want to make a big deal about it, because you kind of then feel a bit awkward to do that. And you're actually it almost fits into the majority question. It's, we just want to do for doing a good job, and we want to have fun, because it's life's pleasure. If we're not enjoying our life and having fun and being treated fairly and with respect, and that we're building relationships based on that truth and respect and courage, then it's kind of like, what's the point, right? But I think I didn't sail with a lot of women. Sometimes I'd be the only woman on board. And sometimes there'd be other women on board, and it made me giggle. I think it was Barbara that mentioned sometimes we don't help ourselves. sometimes we have unconscious bias where we treat others like we were treated. That's male and women. And sometimes we feel that everyone has to forge the same path that we had because we had that difficulty. So why should, like, that's what made me today, and that, like, that's the way that we do things. And we hear this a lot with cadets and mental health and the kind of bullying that goes on sometimes. Changes that we need in leadership within our industry. And I think that's the key point, maybe for me, in reflecting on what Edouard was saying, is, I mean, I think I have really struggled personally with what I now know is called imposter syndrome. So I've been promoted into roles, very technically capable of that, if anyone's wondering on the line, to be able to do the roles, but very conscious that people think I maybe have only got the role because I am a woman. And maybe I was positively discriminated against or for. But when people you like that's a struggle, that's baggage. And I have, like, personally really, really struggled with that, even recently, about being placed in a role, lots of people expecting you to be better or to be awesome because, oh my goodness, I just want, like, everyone in my team to be looked after and turn up for work and have a good environment to work in. I want to do a good job and I want to get us fitter for the future. The industry is changing. That's what I want. I'm amazed at sometimes some of the comments that people say to me even now. Yeah, you would be surprised what people say to me. But one of the nicest things I've had said to me recently was, it's so nice to see a woman at your level in the organisation that has children. And again, I used to kind of shy away from saying I was a mother, as a wife. I used to say I am a seafarer and my name is Susie, and, like, nothing else mattered. But it actually does matter. It's really important to me. That's why, like, my kids are, and my family life is the most important thing. And a lot of people have said that becomes your brand, Susie. That's you lead your team like that. And I actually didn't realise that. So we have to discern the difference between leadership and technical acumen to manage the risk that we do in the industry. Sometimes it goes together and sometimes it doesn't. We need the challenge of different leaders and different people from different sectors. Sometimes we can be quite incestuous in the maritime sector. We can learn from other people around us because people are what makes the trade go round. People is what makes the world go round. But Tamira, pulling back to your point, there is lots and lots of, that I have found, places for mentors for support. So I'm a mentor through the Honourable Company of Master Mariners mentoring scheme. It's free. There's rafts of us that volunteer to coach, to mentor, to support other people in industry. I support peers. I support people who are my peers, support me through just conversations, experiences. From a commercial sector, there's Women on the Wharf. I don't know where, but there's a network there. So there's lots of places as well, so that you don't feel alone and you don't feel, and you can be supported in your career. So you're welcome to reach out to me. I'd love to have a conversation, have a coffee, depending on where you are. If you think we can have, like, some synergies there, and maybe Karina as well. If we're in the kind of trading and the commercial sector of the business, I'm sure that I'm volunteering Karina, and we've just met, but I'm sure she would say the same. And anyone who's listening on this call, please reach out to those schemes and don't feel alone, because we are in this together as a collaboration. To Richard's point, we're all in it together. To Julie's point, we all have a part to play to make the industry successful for the future.
Thanks, Susie. I think you raised some really, really good points there. I think for me, imposter syndrome is always a big one, and I was quite surprised when I found out that white males have imposter syndrome as well. And you kind of go, actually, I don't think there's anybody, does those sort of things that doesn't feel nervous and doesn't kind of question at some point, how did I get here? Have you asked me by mistake? What am I doing? And I think it's when you realise that that you start to understand that everybody's coming from the same place, and actually we can all build together. And you also talked a bit about the passing it on, and I think that's always a really interesting thing of treating other people the way you were treated, as opposed to treating other people the way that you wish that you had been treated, and how you kind of can make that much more positive impact, and make it nicer for the next person. They don't have to go through what you went through. Thanks, Stacey. Thank you very much for that. Barbara, would you like to come in?
Hi, I wanted to thank Susan for bringing the imposter syndrome matter into this conversation, because it's very important, and for you, Debbie, to note that it's not just women. At some point in the media, it was very much promoted as a female syndrome, that a lot of women suffer from it. It's not. This is where, as leaders, we have to look out for those people within the organizations who are capable, but may need a bit of a leg up. Or hand up. I participated once in a session organized by the post office. They realized that they have a huge pool of people and talent, internal talent, that is very capable for internal promotions, but they simply don't reach out because they don't believe in themselves, because they suffer from that imposter syndrome. So what they've done, and it was actually at that time specifically targeted at they specifically targeted women, rather than the wider diversity or even male colleagues who may suffer from the same issue. But it was very commendable that they've organized actually a network internally to talk to women about how to apply for roles, that they're very capable. I mean, there's this anecdotal case that if women look at the CV, if a man sees 80, knows that they can do 80%, obviously the job is even below them, and they apply straight away, whereas women will always point out to you in an interview what they can't do on the job description, but that they'll learn. And giving this positive environment and culture where not knowing everything is normal, and the fact that you are given an opportunity to learn is so important. Also, normalizing failure to some extent, as long as you learn from it, is super, super important for future generation, future leadership. But finishing a little bit on what Susan said, and I think this is where potentially, and I do hope that the new generation will be slightly better at it than we were. I'll go back to the point that Susan made about not calling it out. I had a very powerful conversation with Julie, who's on this panel. She might not remember this, but I this in this group, and I was absolutely guilty of passing on some comments or not raising issues when I saw them, or allowing. And we all female have anecdotes from the industry of how they were treated and what happened. We all actually had, people of diversity all have anecdotes from their life. And Judy was the one who kind of opened my eyes to the point that it's not okay. And if we walk past it and don't say anything, everybody else will. So I think one of my point is we absolutely have to raise it. Not brutally, not necessarily running around with red flags straight away, but raise it. And even on behalf of our colleagues, it's not that necessarily have to be that directed at us, but if we see that our colleague, raise it, be a supporter and an advocate for change. And I think this goes back to my point earlier, that accountability is with everybody, not just with the leaders.
Thanks, Barbara. I'm going to call Julie out as well, because one of the things I was saying was, do we want to, if you see someone being sexist to someone, should you call it out because you don't want to take that person away, you don't want to take that person's power away? And she just said, be offended on your own behalf. You don't need to be offended on behalf of someone else. If it's offensive, be offended and call it out. Right, so we've talked a lot about where we kind of are at the moment, and we started to look at some of the ways that we might solve it. So I'm just going to ask a question of the panel now in general. If we had that magic genie and he would grant you 2 wishes, what 2 things can we do to make the maritime industry more inclusive? And who is it that we need to be asking of those things? Do we need to ask the maritime individually or is it senior managers? So Richard, I'm going to start with you. What two things would you ask that magic genie for to make the maritime industry better?
I'll try and get to that in a slightly different way. I worry about positive discrimination. I really do. I hear what you say, but I slightly worry about it. Let me put that from the perspective of ESG. We haven't talked about ESG yet. I write a lot about the S in ESG because, as somebody said, and I absolutely agree with you, our people are the biggest resource in the company and they need to be managed very, very carefully. Now, up until now, a company has had shareholders whose job it is to drive the financial performance. So they would, I think, frown on positive discrimination. Now we have a whole series of people, stakeholders, who don't just look at the financial figures. They're company. What is your policy on gender balance, on other diverse issues? And I think the younger people, with people coming into our industry, look at a company from a very different perspective from the older people. So to answer your question, if I had a wand, I would love to get a group of young people to look at the company that I work for and tell me, what do you think about my company? Where are the areas that you think are wrong? Not with a view to joining me, but just give me some feedback. I think all the feedback we normally have is from ourselves, and we can't see where we're going wrong. I would love to have feedback from outside. Just one other point to something Edouard said. All this begins with I'm not sure I agree with that. I think it begins on the ground floor, and the leaders have to be aware of what's happening all the way through the business and then to drive it from that point. But it all begins on the ground floor. So I would like the leadership of my company to have very big ears to listen to what's actually happening around me.
Please, can I say something? Please.
Yeah, yes.
Can I just say, positive discrimination already exists right now, Richard. It's just not us that's benefiting from it. So there is already positive discrimination, but it's discriminating for a different type of people. And what we're asking for is some equality. And what we're asking for is a level playing field. And if somebody tells me that they already have a level playing field, you are delusional. And we've got to be a little bit more honest about it. If you're only recruiting from 49% of the population, probably less. So if we could just step back for a second and accept that we don't exist on a level playing field now, and that we're not asking for extra, but actually we exist in a very unjust, unfair place where some people have a headwind and some people have a tailwind. If we only ever talk about those who have the headwind against us and we don't talk about those who have the tailwind, then we're not going to go any further. And we're all going to sit around being very apologetic and saying, excuse me, may I have a seat at the table? And excuse me, may I speak? And I'm not going to anymore because I'm angry and it's not fair and it's not truthful. And that's what holds shipping back. That's why I wouldn't recommend shipping to my daughter, because it's not a truthful place. She will not get a chance of being allowed to see exactly what she's facing because we pretend to ourselves it doesn't really exist.
Thanks, Julia. I think the one thing that always explains it to me is when you see that the image of the three people watching a football match over a fence, and one guy is very tall and can see straight over the fence, and one guy is medium-sized and can't see, and there's a small person. And if you want equality, you can give them all a box to stand on, and the tall person, the middle person can then see, but the small person can't. And actually, we need to talk about fairness, and that's why I'm always a big fan of talking about fairness rather than equality, because fairness is for all three of those people to be able to see, and in order for those three people to be able to see, they need different sized boxes. And I think it's absolutely right, and I think that's when when I hear about women saying, oh, I was only asked on that panel because I was a woman, or maybe I only got that job because they need to tick a box, you kind of go, well, actually, so what? It's, you know, once you've got there, you're only getting the advantages that other people already had by looking like everybody else. They already got through that first door that you didn't get through. So if someone opens the door for you, then right, I'm going to move on to Edouard next to kind of talk about to cover some of the points again if you want to, but also about the magic genie. What 2 things do you want to ask for in order to get a fairer maritime?
Thank you, Debbie. So actually, what I was going to do was answer the genie question differently. I thought I actually think it's the genie I want to talk to. I actually think it's deliberate commitments we need to do, and nobody's going to bring us the answer from outside or fundamentally change the situation. I do think we have it in our control. So let me add to Julie's point, because I agree violently with her on this one. I have no worries whatsoever about positive discrimination. And it's a topic that we have to address, because we have a number of men in our organization who are saying, you're putting in place all of these programs for women, but is that fair, right? What about men? And so I like using data in these situations, because actually data tells us a real story. And I on this, but of course what I'm going to say applies to all forms of diversity. So we measure kind of diversity at all levels in our organization. And so here are facts. In entry-level roles, women account for 46% of our demographics. At senior roles, they account for between 25% and 30% of our demographics. So somewhere along the way, actually all through the way, women, for a variety of reasons, decide to opt out or do not get promoted at the same rate as men. And so what I tell to all of our colleagues is, we're not doing positive discrimination. We're trying to make sure that everyone who enters the organization at more junior levels has an equal opportunity to progress right to the very top. And until that 45% becomes 45% at the top, and actually, to be honest, it should be 50% and becoming 50% at the top, then we are not there. So it's not positive discrimination, it's just neutrality relative to who you. So just to wrap this up, I don't think we need a genie. I just think we need to make the decisions, do the hard work, and it is in our control, right? We can do that today. Somebody early on said, should we wait for society to change? Okay, so maritime is way behind society when it comes to diversity. The business world is way behind society. If you switch on the TV today, I would say the UK media, I've lived in the UK for 24 years now, has done a remarkable change in the past 15 years of making sure that whenever you see panels of experts, they are diverse panels. You don't see that yet in business. Business needs to catch up.
I knew I was going to do it at some point. I was always going to do something where I started speaking without unmuting, but I did spot it very quickly. Thank you, Edouard. And I think it would be remiss of me at this point not to just remind everyone listening about the to go onto our website and look at these and sign yourself up. It doesn't matter if you're like Julie, who thinks that she always thinks she's got nothing good to say and always says brilliant things. Whoever you are, whatever your experience is, you have got something to offer. And we can't get Maritime to help us change if we don't put ourselves forward. So if you're thinking that you haven't got what it takes to be on a speaker panel, then please do get in touch with us, and we will tell you all of the wonderful attributes you don't know you've got that we need to get out there. And the same for the interview panel. In order, we've talked a lot about like recruiting, and in order to be able to spread that pool out, we need to get people on those recruitment panels who look for something slightly different, who aren't looking for the same old. So again, whoever you are, please sign up to all of these things, because you have got something great to offer. I'm going to move on to Karina next to ask you what you think we can do to change, what needs to happen, and any other comments that you've got. Thanks.
Richard, you are very worried about the numbers of your CEO sort of following the numbers. Let me enlighten you. Women are paid 30% less than men in the maritime industry. Those are surveys. So if you actually positive discriminate the women now, first of all, they work twice as hard. and your salaries numbers will go down dramatically. So I don't think your CEO has to worry about his numbers at all when he goes for positive discrimination. And that is just numbers. The thing is, as I say, we are double productive as well. So the output is going to be even higher. To that, magic wand, genie, yes, I'd love a genie, and I'd love the genie, please, to remove all our unconscious and conscious bias when we are recruiting and when we are promoting. And that would be my absolute dream. I know this is, as I say, if Genie had the magic wand, that'd be, I think then we would. And the other thing is, yes, I'd love equal pay, please. I'm so sorry to say this, but it's been like, the higher you go in the maritime industry as well, if you come to the director levels, you earn 70% less than men. I'm sorry, that just isn't going to cut it. And you're not going to attract any females to that. Neither would you attract non-graduates, because they are paid a lot less than the graduates. And therefore also, I would wish that Genie would wave her wand and say, you must employ 80% non-graduates and only 20% graduates. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karina. I'm just going to mention a comment that's in the Q&A before I come to Susan, because this is absolutely my favourite subject. What do we need? Retention and progression of sanitary bins. I just can't believe there are two things that I'm still talking about, and it's why don't we have sanitary bins everywhere on every ship? And it just defies belief that we still have to answer these basic questions, and that we have to fight for these basic things. So yeah, I'm just going to comment up on it. But now I'm going to go to you, Susan, to give us some of your comments, but also if you've got anything that you think that we can all do to make the industry better. Thanks.
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here shaking my head, and again, I mean, sanitary bins. 24 years in industry, we're still having this conversation, and I think, you know, we kind of got a heads up in these questions before, let's be honest with the listeners, and I'm going to change my what might be my two things. Is actually, I don't trust us as an industry, and sanitary bins proves the point. Okay, 24 years we've been discussing this. What do you think women do every month if they don't? Surprise, ship owners are not being fined right, left and centre because of MARPOL and the pollution that is going into the seas. That is the practical elements of what is happening here. I think we can't be trusted. I think we need, unfortunately, from a learning culture perspective in our industry, we need regulation to keep us right. We need somebody to tell us what to do. We need punchy targets. We need to be held to account as an industry. Will the industry do that, and will the legislators do it? No. Okay? Because it's not important enough for them to, I think, Richard's point of the grassroots. But I do think leadership and actually the decision makers is at the forefront of this. So what I would really love is for organisations and for people to listen, whoever is listening to this podcast when it goes out, is to have a think about their organisation and to push minded organisations and to actually push the regulators to be ashamed that they are not pushing this down, and to therefore help. There is parts of the industry that will struggle without regulation, okay, because the financial cycle will kick in. That almost needs to be the justifiable parity to meet regulatory standards. But we need punchy targets. We need to aim for a true representation of our societal norms. That's what it should look like whenever we're at work. Karina, again, pay is always an issue, okay? They rely on the good nature and goodwill, and that we're grateful that we've got to the top of the table. Isn't it lovely? And at the same time, that then leads to the retention issues, because childcare is a huge cost. And unfortunately, the emotional baggage that comes with children often becomes the balance of the just whose salary work. And that, again, there's loads of great guys, and that isn't the case, but it is the norm, okay, because we're not that much now kind of away. So punchy targets, everybody. Let's have organisations, actually, to Sue's point, you might be making a pledge, but actually your actions speak louder than words. So let's use some podcasts. Please get on Instagram, please get on your website pages and tell some good news stories. There's lots of good stuff going on in our industry. We're beating ourselves up with the bad stuff, but let's publicise the good stuff and shame those that are not publicising how good they are. Like, let's be honest. We've got issues. Okay, yeah, we don't know. Has anyone else got these issues? Do you want to collaborate? Has anyone else had these issues and actually they've fixed them? Tell us how, because we don't know. We're struggling. And actually just talk about it more, listen more, and set yourself some really good goals and strive to get there, and make sure you measure yourself against them, and don't just pretend because you've spent 4 hours in a conference to someone's life, because you haven't. For those that are listening as well online, just to kind of plug a little bit of the Maritime Commission's work, there's some videos for Diversity Week. I think it's in November, and Chrissie and Debbie maybe keep me right. They're looking for exactly this. If anyone would like to talk about their careers, talk about mentorship, talk about creating allies between us to publicise the work that we're doing, I'm going to say reach out to Chrissie at Maritime UK, who let's kind of collaborate together to kind of drive that change going forward.
Thanks, Susan. We're rapidly running out of time, but I'm going to move to Namrata to answer her Genie questions, but please try and be brief so we can get everyone else in there.
I'll be as quick as I can. I mean, basically, if I had Thanos' infinity stones in my glove, I would snap my fingers and reverse majority in the shipping sector, and men were the minority, because I think, but I would keep all the knowledge that we have of the discrimination we felt, because I feel like there is an actual desire to equalize things, and that would probably make it slightly better, you know, after the purge. I definitely think the other thing that I would really like us to remember is that we are not special. And I say this in the full knowledge of, I love maritime and I am such a geek. I have written a death metal song about ballast water. Like, that's how much of a geek I am. Ballast water, the convention was ratified on my birthday, and I celebrated it more than my birthday. But my point being, we are not a unique industry. Lots of industries are struggling to make sure that people are equal and to be inclusive. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's not pretend that we're so special that we need very special, like, things that are catered and customized only to us. Let's learn from the lessons that other people before us. Look to tech. You know, they have had a huge issue with diversity and inclusivity, and they're working on it. It's still a problem, but there's good work out there. There's lots of academics. There are lots of people and organizations that do excellent work. And I say, let's not struggle through that same journey when we could just learn from them and take the lift to the top and figure out the next problems that we need to solve to really make our industry fantastic. So those are the two things I would solve.
Thank you, Nam. That was brief. Barbara, I'm going to come to you next to wrap up with your two things that we need.
I don't want a genie in a bottle. I just want the right candidate for the role that is being recruited for or offered at the right pay, that is whatever, equal, whoever it is. It's not just men versus women. I think it's very individual, and as Nam said, everybody has different experience. I'm going to post controversial. Is it maritime industry or is it British maritime industry issue? Just a point out there. We all attend many international conferences, and I come from Poland. There is, and this is again going to be controversial, but I say it. My career has been in England, and I always thought that Poland would be behind, and actually it isn't. And it's surprising. And we go to the same conferences. All of us, we meet, we all know each other. Very incestuous, as someone said today. You always see the same faces. And it's remarkable how jobs are being handed over from a person to a person, especially at the higher level. So hence why, Richard, I will ask for some level of positive opportunities. And against, a few years ago, I'll be saying no to positive discrimination. I was trying to be this cool person to say, well, we all can get there. Actually, no, not everybody can get there. Some people need it. It's interesting. I was just looking at something on Instagram, and it was Bill Gates talking about ovarian lottery. Some of us win that ovarian lottery, and also this chromosome. So I think there is a need for an element of positive discrimination. Sadly, because you would want equality, but there isn't any. So I think we need to probably give it a bit of a nudge.
Thanks, Barbara. Danny, I'm going to come to you next with your request for the genie, if there is a genie.
Thanks, Debbie. And just to look at, or to respond briefly to Barbara's point as well about international aspects, we are being observed in what we're doing here at Maritime UK. We are making a difference, and the Maritime Network and Nautilus have been approached by equivalent bodies in the USA for advice and assistance in establishing similar programs there. And I know that people in Brussels and Belgian trade unions are also watching what we're doing with interest. So we are making a difference here. As I say, we've got a lot to do, but we can make an example both within the UK and further afield as well. To go to the two wishes for the genie, first of all, is if an organisation is serious about environmental, social and governance policies, come and speak to the trade unions about it, like Nautilus International and like the International Transport Workers Federation, because we will give you advice, assistance, and we will help you to make sure you are following those ESG policies through social dialogue with trade unions. For leaders in the industry to collectively recognise that there is an issue, just because they've not seen some kind of problem with women, with LGBT plus people, with people from the Ethnicity and Maritime Network, that doesn't mean that there isn't a problem. And it just means that they've got a culture where people aren't able to talk about their issues, and where people don't feel free to bring up these matters in their workplaces. Safety and security was one of the big issues that came from the Pride in Maritime Roundtable on Monday, and if people feel free or feel able to talk about their safety and security at work as LGBT plus people, but also as other diverse strands, then again it will really make our industry one that is welcoming to people of all diverse networks. Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like she's having far too much fun. So we're going to find out what Julie's wishes for the genie are.
My colleagues in a different office can hear me shouting. They've brought me a drink, which I'm not going to tell you if it's water or gin and tonic, but I'm going to tell you that this actually comes to my point. It's about being able to bring your authentic self to work. And I feel like I can come to work and be myself and be with my colleagues and explain what I get passionate about, what I find frustrating, what I need help with. So my genie would do two things. The first is resolve the 1,000 ways that we make people who are different from us feel like they're not welcome. So we can use the example of women. We can talk about sanitary bins. We can talk about white shorts as part of your summer uniform when you go on board ships. That's not always appealing to women, and men shouldn't be embarrassed to talk about this stuff. There's not anybody on this call who hasn't been pulled or pushed out of a woman. About the 1,000 ways that maybe we make people feel not welcome, however different they are in our industry. And I would also have the genie make sure that we are comfortable asking for equity in our home life as well as in our working life, because those of us that juggle the multiple demands of work and parents also need to be able to ask for that in our homes too, and that's not always easy. In fact, sometimes that's harder to ask for at work. So that's what I would ask the genie for, to allow us all to be more comfortable and more authentic and more honest without it feeling like anybody's being attacked, just that we're being honest.
Thanks, Julie. Right, we've got a couple of minutes left, so we should be wrapping up just about on time. So Sue, I'll come to you now with your 2 points for the genie.
Okay, so my 2 points for the genie, all the board directors of all the companies that are not on this call in the British Maritime, put them in a room, and I want this panel to be on the stage talking to them, because it's no good keep on talking to the competitors. We have so many of these events, they're brilliant, so much good stuff comes out of it, but we're only talking to the people that have got the ears ready to listen, and we need to talk to the people whose ears are shut. So that's my first thing. My second thing is I want to come back in 4 years' time and see that DFT have created a transport diversity index where we actually highlight the best practices, and we then actually encourage companies that are not on that index to actually want to be part of it, because that is proven a way to get people at all levels to do it. So my two wishes are that I speak to everybody I can't speak to now, and
Thank you, Sue. And then last but not least, Chrissie, we will come to you with your 2 genie wishes.
Thank you. I don't have anything new or unique to say, but I think it comes down to people should feel safe to come to and feel supported at work. It's so important. We know what's not right in the maritime sector, but let's just be open about our progress and let's celebrate our small and our big wins. And as we've all said as well, let's stop talking to ourselves. Let's share with other sectors that might be behind us. Let's help them along the way, sectors that are ahead of us. Let's just be honest and say, help, what can we learn from you? It's transferable skills at the end of the day. So they are my 2 things. I will just say a huge thank you, whilst I've got the mic, to Debbie for chairing today, and to our really, really fabulous panel. Thank you for this open and honest conversation, and how exciting that we can do this during London International Shipping Week. I mean, let's celebrate that as a win. I just want to also say a big thank you again to IHS Markit for sponsoring today, and Diversity Maritime sponsors, Aberdeen Harbour Board and Stena Line. A huge thank you to everyone. We will put this recording online for anyone that missed it, and they'll be able to watch it later. I'll hand back to Debbie now to wrap up, but a huge thank you again from me.
Thanks, Chrissie, and yes, my thanks to everyone on our panel. I think it's been a really, really great conversation. And it's always such a shame with these conversations that you just start getting Julie shouting when it's time to kind of move on. So thank you to every one of my panelists. Thank you to everybody that's come on and listened to us online today. To everybody out there, please do get in touch with Diversity in Maritime. Join the Taskforce networks, join the interview panels, join the speaker panels, join everything, do everything, be everywhere. And literally by accident, I'm coming in just about on time, so it's just 2 minutes to 2. I hope nobody missed their lunch as we've followed their lunch times. Again, thanks to everyone. This recording will be online. We'll see you all again soon. Thank you.
Just before we finish, there's one thing I want to do, and that's to make a public thank you, a massive thank you to Chrissie. This week has been amazing, and we've had such an action-packed week, and it wouldn't have been possible without Chrissie. So for all of us, thank you. Thank you, Steve, such small words, but thank you.
Yeah, sorry, that's completely remiss of me. Absolutely, thank you, Chrissie. We could not have done any of this without you.
Teamwork takes a village. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Take care and stay safe out there.